A man stands at the rail of a small wooden boat, somewhere in the North Atlantic, and lets a raven go. He has no compass, no chart, no idea what, if anything, is ahead of him, only that the bird might know something he doesn't. He watches it climb, turn north, and vanish. He follows it. That is how a man found an island by trusting a bird's opinion. And it is only one of seven voyages, spread across roughly 2 centuries, that on paper should never have worked. No compass for most of this period. No accurate map of anything past the last coast they knew. No one waiting on the far side to tell them they'd arrived. And somehow, with almost none of what we'd call navigation, these people reached Iceland, Greenland, the White Sea, the edge of the Arctic, and a continent the rest of Europe wouldn't officially notice for another 500 years. Now, one honest note before we start, because it's the whole point of this list. The older these stories get, the more history shares a room with legend. Some of what follows is written down centuries after it supposedly happened, by people with an ear for a good tale. Some of it is carved into the ground and dated to the year. Where the record is thin, I'll tell you, and I've deliberately ordered these 7 from the ones held up mostly by storytelling, at number 7, down to the one at number 1 that no longer needs the story at all, because we found it. If you like history told with the seams showing the evidence, not just the drama, this is the channel for that. Stick around. Let's start where the legend is loudest. Number 7. The 860s. A Norse sailor named Floki Vilgerðarsson loads a boat for a deliberate one-way trip. He's not raiding. He's looking for land people say exists somewhere to the northwest. And he brings, of all things, 3 ravens. Out in open water, he releases the first. It circles and flies back the way they came toward the islands behind them. Useless. Later, he frees the second. It goes up, looks around, and settles back onto the ship. Also useless, but telling. No land close enough to tempt it. Then the third bird. It rises, fixes on something no human aboard can see, and flies straight ahead and gone. They steer after it and it brings them to Iceland. It's a wonderful scene. It's also where I have to open the door. That raven story comes from the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, written down a long time after Floki would have lived. That's tradition, not a ship's log. But the technique underneath it is real and old. Sailors across many seafaring cultures carried birds precisely because a caged bird, freed over empty ocean, will fly toward the nearest land. The legend may be dressed up. The trick works. Floki himself did not get a fairy tale ending. A good summer made him careless. He forgot to lay in winter feed, and the cold killed his livestock. Bitter, he climbed a headland, saw a fjord choked with drift ice, and named the whole island Iceland, a bad review that stuck for 11 centuries. Number 6 pushes in the opposite direction south, into warm water, and into the part of this list where I stop making jokes. Around 859, a Norse fleet does something audacious. It fights its way through the Strait of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean, a sea that thought it was done worrying about northern raiders. 2 leaders are named in the sources, Hastin and Björn Ironside. Over about 2 years, they work the coasts of Spain, North Africa, southern France, and into Italy. And this is where I have to be careful, because the honesty door here isn't about whether it happened, it's about what it was. This was not an adventure. These were raids on inhabited towns. The people on those coasts were killed, enslaved, and burned out of their homes, and no amount of distance makes that a caper. The most famous episode is the sack of a city called Luna, in northwest Italy taken, the tradition says, because the raiders mistook it for Rome itself. Whether that detail is true or a later flourish, I genuinely can't tell you, and I won't pretend otherwise. This raid is mentioned in Frankish, Arab, Spanish, and Irish sources, and they disagree with each other on the details more than they agree. What is not in dispute is the shape of it: a long, violent expedition, and a costly one. The fleet that came home was a fraction of the one that set out. The impossible part is purely one of reach, an open boat culture from the far north, operating for years in a sea on the other side of a continent. The cost of that reach was borne by people who never chose to be part of the story. Number 5. Back to the North Atlantic, and to a man with a talent for making the best of a bad situation. Erik the Red has a problem. He keeps killing people. Exiled from Iceland, for exactly that. He does something most exiles don't. He uses the sentence as a scouting trip. He sails west, toward land others had only glimpsed, and spends the full 3 years of his banishment exploring an enormous, ice-locked coast. Then he sails back to Iceland to recruit settlers. And here he makes his masterstroke, which is not seamanship, it's branding. The country he's selling is, for the most part, a wall of glacier. So he calls it Greenland. As far as we can tell, this is the earliest recorded example of naming real estate for the property you wish you were selling. The astonishing thing is that it worked. A fleet of around 25 ships set out behind him, families and livestock and everything they owned, chasing a green land that was mostly white. And here the drama stops being about marketing. Of those roughly 25 ships, the saga says only about 14 reached the other side. The rest turned back or were lost. Read that again, slowly, as a number of households. A convoy that left whole and arrived with the gaps counted in people. The colony Erik founded lasted for centuries. It was built on a good story and paid for at the going rate of the open ocean. If a channel like this is worth your time, a subscribe genuinely helps it survive its own bad winters. Now, number 4. And my favorite decision on the entire list. Number 4. The year is 986, and a trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson is trying to sail from Iceland to Greenland to spend the winter with his father. A storm has other plans. It shoves him off course, days into unknown water, until he raises a coastline he has never heard described. It's wrong in every particular. It's low. It's covered in forest. There are no glaciers, no bare mountains, nothing that matches a single thing anyone's told him about Greenland. And that's because it isn't Greenland. He is, in all likelihood, the first European to lay eyes on North America. His crew, sensibly, wants to go ashore. New land, after a storm, of course they do. Bjarni says no. He looks at the new world, an entire hemisphere no one back home knows exists, decides it is not the destination printed on his ticket, and turns the boat around to go find Greenland. The most consequential landfall of the age gets vetoed because it wasn't on the itinerary. I want to be fair to him. Our source for this is the Saga of the Greenlanders, written down generations later, and some historians think the story exists partly to explain how the next man knew where to go. But the sailing details are oddly practical, not heroic. Nobody inventing a legend invents a hero whose defining act is refusing to get out of the boat. Which brings us to the man who took Bjarni's directions and actually stopped. Hold that. Number 3. And here the list quietly changes gears, because for the first time, we're not relying on a saga written down centuries later. We're listening to the man himself. Around the year 890, a Norwegian chieftain named Other makes a voyage almost no one has attempted. He sails north along his own coast, keeps going past the top of Scandinavia, rounds the North Cape into the Arctic, and turns east into the White Sea cold. Remote water at the roof of the world. On its own, that's a serious feat of open boat sailing. But that's not why we know about it. We know about it because Other then travels to England and tells the whole thing, in person, to King Alfred of Wessex, and Alfred's court writes it down, folding his account into an Old English translation of a Roman history book that badly needed someone who'd actually been up north. Sit with how strange that is. Almost everything else on this list reaches us through legend, filtered by centuries. This reaches us as testimony, a working sailor's first-person description of where he went, what the coast looked like, who lived there, preserved by the writing desk of a foreign king. No epic, no ravens. Just a man saying, in effect, I went to the edge of the map, and here is what's there, and someone had the sense to take the minutes. Number 2. And this one is a single life that outruns almost every man on this list. Her name is Guðríður Thorbjarnardóttir, and if the sagas are even roughly right, she may have covered more of the known world than anyone else of her century. Follow the itinerary. She's born in Iceland. She sails to Greenland. From there, she crosses to Vinland, North America, and gives birth to a son on that far shore, a boy named Snorri. By tradition, the first child of European descent born on the continent. Then she turns the whole journey around, back to Greenland, back to Iceland, and at the end of her life, as an old woman, she walks overland, across Europe, on foot, all the way to Rome, and comes home again. One cradle in Iceland, one grave, a world away. A life stretched across the entire map these voyages were drawing. I'll open the door, because it matters here. Her story comes from the 2 Vinland sagas, and sagas need caution. They contradict each other on details, and some scenes are clearly shaped for a listener. But there's a reason to take the shape of her life seriously anyway. Those 2 sagas were written independently, and where independent sources agree on the frame while disagreeing on the trimmings, the frame is usually the load-bearing part. They differ on the details. They agree that this woman went almost everywhere, and everywhere, in her lifetime, ran from Iceland to North America to Rome, which leaves the one place the sagas kept pointing the land across the Western Sea. For 1,000 years, that was where history ended and the fairy tale began. Until it didn't. Number 1. For centuries, this was the voyage nobody was required to believe. Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, the Greenland salesman, sails west from Greenland, following the coast Bjarni had refused to land on, and this time, somebody steps out of the boat. He builds shelters. He names the country Vinland. The sagas describe timber, wild grapes, a winter camp on a new continent, 5 centuries before Columbus. And for most of the time since, serious people filed it under legend. A nice story the Norse told about themselves. No proof. Then the ground started talking. In 1960, at a windswept place in northern Newfoundland called L'Anse aux Meadows, archaeologists uncovered something that had no business being there. The remains of a Norse settlement. The outlines of turf halls, a smithy for working iron nails, European technology, on the wrong side of the ocean, centuries too early. The fairy tale had a foundation, literally. But the story doesn't end at real. It ends at a date, and the date is the part I want you to sit with. For decades, the best anyone could say was sometime around the 11th century. Then, in a study published in 2021, researchers reached for something extraordinary. About 1,000 years ago, the sun threw off a burst of radiation so intense it left a chemical fingerprint in the wood of trees all over the planet, a single, worldwide marker, laid down in the growth rings in one specific year. That year is known, and in the Norse timbers at L'Anse aux Meadows, you can find that marker and then simply count the rings the tree grew afterward, out to the bark, to the season it was cut. The count comes back to the exact year the wood was felled. Not around the 11th century, not circa. The trees were cut in the year 1021, and that means Europeans were standing on North America, axes in hand, exactly 1,000 years before the study was published. One honest note, because it's the honest thing to do, that method dates when the trees were cut, not the first or last day a Norse boot touched the continent. People were almost certainly there a little before and possibly after. But that's a quibble about the edges. The center holds like nothing else on this list. A story that survived 1,000 years as a maybe now has a birthday. So how did they do all of it with no compass and no chart? Here, finally, is the answer the whole list was circling. For most of this period, the Norse had no magnetic compass at all. What they had was the sun. They sailed by latitude, holding the noon sun at the same height day after day to keep a straight line east or west, and they read everything else the ocean offered. The set of the waves, the flight lines of seabirds, the color of the water, the pull of the current, and directions memorized and handed down by voice. It made them frighteningly good at running east and west, and easy to lose going north and south. Every triumph and every disaster on this list lives inside that margin of error, which is the thing worth carrying away. We tend to picture discovery as equipment, better instruments, better maps. These 7 voyages were made almost entirely without either. What they had was the noon sun, the color of the water, and a willingness to keep going after the last coast had dropped away behind them, and there was nothing ahead but the guess. They didn't have a way to know what was out there. They went anyway. That's the whole technology. If you want more history told this way, the wonder kept, the seam showing, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.